Hello and welcome back to Everyday Writers, your one-stop shop for demystifying the writing process. We're here to be helpful guides on your journey to becoming a published author. I'm one of your hosts, Crystal McQueen.
And I'm your other host, Jordan S. Keller. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're breaking down the first page of your novel. There isn't a one size fits all guide to first pages, but over the years, Crystal and I have learned what works and some pitfalls to watch out for.
So, to start this, one of the most painful things that I think I've experienced is being at a conference where they have a panel of agents, and they have people in the audience submit their first page, and they'll have an individual read that first page, and the agents will raise their hand when they will stop reading. And it's very, very painful to watch how quickly an agent will stop reading. Once the agents get to three agents that have raised their hands, everything will stop, and then the agents will talk about what they're looking for in that page, what made them stop, things like that. And I've probably listened to at least 100 of these where agents will raise their hands. I've only seen two actually make it all the way to the end of the page. And one of those, the agent said, whoever read that, um, I'm sorry, one of the ones that they did stop, another agent said, whoever's that is, make sure you come and query me before you leave. So even agents don't really agree on the first
Yeah,
pages. But out of this, Jordan and I are going to go through some of the things that we have learned to help make your page stand out and avoid being that page that's stalled.
that would be so painful to have them read your page. Oh my gosh. Um, so speaking of good pages, your good first page needs to be interesting, and a good way to ensure that it's doing that is including action. There should always be some kind of movement on the page, and we're not just talking about the character moving through a grocery aisle or something. The movement needs to matter to the character. So if we
Mhm.
stick with our grocery store example, they could be walking down the aisle, but the movement should be them and this inner turmoil because they are making this fancy dinner for their boss and they have to find a substitute ingredient for this pasta noodle they need. And so that stress, that dilemma, that's your movement and not so much the pushing the buggy down the cart. So
Yeah.
movement is very important.
Yeah. And speaking of characters, your first page should introduce your main character and your novel's point of view. So let's start with talking about the very first line. You want to hook your reader and tell them exactly what kind of book they're reading. Great first lines can tell you so much about a book. 124 was spiteful. Call me Ishmael. The best of times, the worst of times. These are iconic for a reason. They set the stage for the book. In Toni Morrison's Beloved, her first lines are 124 was spiteful, full of baby's venom. The women in the house knew it, and so did their children. It's just gripping from the very beginning. You already know this book is about the supernatural. The book is about women. It's the female presence, the female perspective. And so it just tells you so much just in those three lines. You know exactly what you're getting into with this book. In Matt Haig's The Midnight Library, the book starts 19 years before she decided to die. Nora Seed sat in the warmth of a small library in a school in the town of Bedford. You know where you are. You know that we're going to go to a journey where this woman has chosen to die. There's just a whole lot of hook to that first line. We know the voice of the book. We know the main character. She's in the very first line. Um, and then one of my favorites is Chain Gang All Stars.
Yeah.
And the book starts with a chapter title, The Freeing of Melancholia Bishop. So just the title of the chapter, you're like, okay, what's happening here? And the first line is, she felt their eyes, all the executioners. And it's like, it's just amazing to go into that knowing, okay, who are all these executioners? You learn in the next line she's in an arena. Learn in the next line that she's in an interview she doesn't want to be in. So it's just so amazing that first page that you're just tense from the beginning, knowing that we're about to fight. And so what you get in every one of these books is who the main character is, where they are. The reader gets a feeling of what kind of book they're about to read. Not a data dump, but rather words, scene, and feeling. The details come later.
I always feel like a good first line takes my breath away. And like all those lines you read, it was like
Well, it always makes me think of your first line in Wildfire. Oh gosh,
Oh,
it might be the wrong one. The building
the
burned
building burned like a tinderbox.
like a
Yeah.
tinderbox. Like I immediately know that something is on fire, and it's just like it sets the scene for the entire book. That's one of my favorite first lines.
Another thing that should be clear in these really good first pages is the time and setting of your novel. There shouldn't be any confusion if your story is taking place in a high school in 2005 or a fantastical setting some 800 years ago. I personally like showing this through clothing choices, like between baggy sweatpants or elven armor. It's very clear who this character is, where they are, and when they are. An example I'd like to bring is one of my favorite books, Hush Hush by Becca Fitzpatrick. It opens with the main character in an awkward situation because they're science seating chart arrangement got switched. And so you know you're in high school, you know you're with a bunch of teenagers, and it brings that drama and tension in immediately.
That's really, really good. If you can actually set the scene and you don't actually have to say you're in a high school,
Mm-hmm.
that's some skill right there. But one of the other things that you want to make sure that you're doing is by the end of the first page, you want your reader to ask why they need to turn to the next page. Like
Yes.
you want that reader to not be able to resist turning to the next page. What's your intriguing premise? Are you in an arena? Do you have a haunted house tormenting its occupants like Beloved? And a character with an impossible choice like The Hunger Games. Tension is crucial to be throughout your novel, but it's most important on the first page. And for tension, you need action. So, like Jordan said, it can't just be pushing a grocery cart down the aisle. There's got to be something involved that your reader is going to care about. So, put them in a situation where your reader wants to see how they get out. If you're looking for helpful tips and tricks on tension, last month we covered 7 ways to add tension to your novel, so we're not going to cover them again here. But it's a great way to hook your reader and your agent. So, check out the episode.
I once heard that a good way to show like your character in these opening pages, and this might stretch your whole first chapter, but it's make them have to make a decision. It doesn't have to be like an end of the world decision, but make them have to make a decision that impacts them either positively or negatively. It
Hmm.
shows good movement. It's that tension of will they, won't they? And it also sheds some light on your character motivations and what they value.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we're going to change and start talking about some pitfalls about first pages. These are a few things to avoid. And to mirror our first tip about movement, you don't want your first page to be everything but exposition. From a psychological standpoint, if you crack open a book and it's just a huge wall of text, a huge info dump, it's going to turn your readers off because it's going to look boring. It's going to look like a textbook. So not only having movement with your reader, but having movement with your pacing, your line breaks, your dialogue.
So
uh,
there's a few books that I've had a really hard time getting through. In our last episode where we talked about Moby Dick with Rob, that's all that book is just walls of
yeah.
text. And like I get that there's a whole lot of learning and cutting edge things that like, there's a reason it's part of the literary canon, but there's a reason a lot of people are like, I'm not going to read Moby Dick, and it's not because it's 800 pages. People read 800 pages all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that wall of text is really the reader's going to say, what am I going to get out of this? What's intriguing about it? What's interesting about it? And so I agree with you. Like if I opened a book and it was just a straight wall of text, I'd be like, okay, let me check the premise again and see if I really want to read this.
I don't even go that far. I just close it.
Uh, so the a book I just finished reading was one that Jody, our one of our buddies, recommended to me, and it was funny because the premise was so interesting and I was so into it. But about like midway through the book, I was like, I can't read this anymore because it was so much exposition. Like it was telling us and stuff instead of showing us, and that's the big pitfall with exposition is
Mhm.
you tend to lean towards tell instead of showing. And showing's interesting, and that's what's going to
Mhm.
keep your reader reading.
And you don't have to necessarily let your reader know everything immediately. Let the character, let the world bleed out over the first couple of chapters. It'll be worth it to kind of string it all along in
Yeah, but
bite-sized pieces.
yeah, like in Beloved, you don't know anything about this haunted house, but you learn all about the characters in it and how just tormented they are. And that in itself is interesting, like you don't know why the house is haunted or what happens. It's an amazing book.
Mhm.
Highly recommend reading it. But like if we said, why the house was haunted from the very beginning, then there's no reason to read the book and find out why these women are tormented or also why they don't leave.
Mhm.
So, this next one's a little tricky depending on the story you're crafting, but try to avoid introducing too many major characters on your first page. This doesn't mean you can't start with a party. There could be a dozen people in the room. It's important to note here to make it very clear which characters the reader should care about and the ones they don't have to remember. You can do this with the important characters having a dialogue or interacting in some way, and make it clear that they're the stars of the show. So, for example, in Station 11, the story opens with a play. 7 characters are mentioned in the very first page, but it's very clear that our main characters are Jeevan and Arthur. How does the author tell us this? By referring to the side characters by their role rather than their name. So the
Oh,
usher said, the man's girlfriend said, the actor playing Gloucester or the actor playing Edgar. We also get so much more information about Jeevan and Arthur. Jeevan studying to be a paramedic, which is so important later. And Arthur is a very famous actor who appears to be in his last hurrah. And all of this is captured in 4 paragraphs, but we have action. We have a play that is happening, and you don't just have a guy that we're learning about sitting in the audience watching the play. You have an actor swaying on stage. You have Jeevan and his girlfriend arguing. You have an usher coming over to shush them. And all of this happens in 4 pages, and you don't know what's happening, but it's a lot of tension in just that very first page.
I feel like everything keeps going back to tension and just how important it is to just make sure it's all throughout your novel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our final tip for the episode, and it's one you've probably heard before, and it's not to start your novel with your character waking up or in a car. They're overused, they don't allow for good movement, and they don't add much excitement. Unless your character is getting into a car wreck or waking up with a gun to their head, you can always make a cliche interesting by turning on its head. But if you're just starting out on your writing journey, maybe start in a different location with your opening pages. We both heard of agents putting down an opening page if the character is waking up or in a car, they won't even get past that first paragraph. So it's better just to sort of ex-nay that whole idea to be safe.
And if you're shocked that agents don't want your character starting in a car, me too. Us too.
Yeah.
We didn't know it. But it was really shocking to have an agent say, do not start your novel in a car. It's been overdone. And looking around the audience, everybody's shocked, but every agent on the stage is nodding. So you have to remember that even if you don't understand why these things are, these agents are seeing thousands of manuscripts, each year, and they're seeing the stuff that's done over and over and over
Mm-hmm.
again. So maybe try to avoid those cliches, especially if you're starting out.
Crystal, when you start a new project, how do you kind of figure out that first page, or are there any outlining steps you really focus on, or how do you approach it?
Um, Keep in mind your first page, you are going to write that page more
So
times than any other piece of your novel. So I try not to stress about my first page. I try to get the novel written. And then once I have the whole novel and I know, what my character's main issues are, what their big flaw is, then I really try to focus on that first page, especially that first line, that tries to encompass everything about the novel that I'm trying to say. So, um, like it's not really an outline. It's just an acceptance that I know it's not going to be the same page when I finish. And that's the one I really focus on after the novel is done. How about you?
it's funny you say that the rewriting process, because 100% you're going to rewrite that first page, that first paragraph so many times. A week before I submitted Failing Gravity to my publisher, I'd already pitched the book, already given them the outline. They wanted it, they loved it. But I had changed that opening line so many times, and I finally ended on one that just like kind of took my breath away and gave me goosebumps and made me feel like I was flying. It's like, oh, this is the one, this is the one. So I always look for that feeling of it took my breath away.
Yeah.
And you might too. In one of our mini writing notebooks, I have a whole list of like cool opening lines that could be used. And one day I hope to use them all at some point. Jody, like you mentioned, we joked of having a notebook at group, and everyone can just write down killer opening lines for free use, essentially.
See, that's amazing because I struggle with that first line. Like that first line is one because that first line is so important to me and I
Mhm.
see how well people do it. It's like overthinking it. Is this
Yeah,
actually a good line or is it just me and only in my head? And maybe that's a imposter syndrome, but
it might also play into that fear of the blank page because, like, if this first line isn't the most amazing thing ever, what's the point?
Yeah.
So maybe just start on page two and like, oh, we'll get to that later.
If you take anything away from, this conversation, it's do not stress about your first page when you're in the drafting stage.
Yeah.
Don't even stress about your first page in the polishing phase, because when you actually start querying, you need to get those first 10 pages, usually those first 50 pages, looked at by a professional. You want to make sure that it's clean. You are going to rewrite that first page. And so you can either choose to spin your wheels on that first page, for months and not actually make progress, or you can choose to save it at the end and make it your intention to make it the best it can be after the novel is done.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my advice.
No, I totally agree. Like, it can wait. Finish the book.
Finish the book. That's it. That should be our tagline. Yeah, finish your book.
Finish the book. Just write it already.
Well, that's all the time that we have for this episode of Everyday Writers. Thank you so much for letting us be part of your journey. And just remember, your first page needs to be exciting enough to keep your reader and your agent reading.
By the end of that first page, your reader should know who your main character is, the setting, time period, and your novel's point of view.
And please, please, please do not use your first page to dump info. This should be action. It should be tense. You need to make sure that those words jump off the page.
And then join us next month for our 2025 best reads. And if you love what you hear on Everyday Writers, don't forget to click that subscribe button down below and follow Crystal and I on Instagram.
And don't forget, every day is a good day to write.
Bye for now.